opportunity.
How great of a speech giver he was.
The steps that he took definitively helped secure Special Forces' place in the Army from that point forward. That we can say.
Without the Korean War, you don't have the ability to do special operations in Vietnam.
Yeah. From the USASOC Historian's Office, I sat down with Dr. Troy Sackrady and Dr. Jared Tracy to discuss President Kennedy's strategic vision, the history of the Kennedy-Yarborough connection, and how one man's belief in the power of the individual changed the course of Special Forces forever. What would history be like if he hadn't been killed? And if he had fulfilled, the first term, so maybe a second term, and what would that have done to Dr. Sackrady, Dr. Tracy? Welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thanks for hosting us.
Yeah,
We're in your lair here, deep inside the historian's office at U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Troy, we've been talking for a couple of years now about coming down here, and you've offered us this space, and you're really appreciative to have the chance to come down here. We just were able to sit down with General Ferguson and Dalia Munoz, and on the lead up to Memorial Day, have a great conversation about what it means to honor the fallen on Memorial Day, and obviously her dad's legacy, Sergeant First Class Pedro Munoz, and the loss of him and what that's meant. And now we're going to talk about another influential figure within the Special Forces Regiment and across Army Special Operations, but John F. Kennedy. Short presidency, but an absolute impact to our organization in so many ways. When you hear the name President John F. Kennedy, what comes to your mind?
I think for me, you could probably ask anyone in the Special Forces Regiment and you might get 1,000 different answers. For me, what really stands out with President Kennedy is his remarks in his April 1962 letter, which was that he described it as a symbol of excellence, a badge of courage, and a mark of distinction in the fight for freedom. Is this symbolism that Special Forces and the Green Beret really inherited during his presidency, and how linked Special Forces became with the fight for freedom around the world. I mean, it's within the Special Forces motto, "De oppresso libere," to free the oppressed. So that symbolism of Special Forces as a cause for freedom, I think, really stands out for me with President Kennedy.
And I think for me, growing up, JFK was always such this iconic figure that especially our parents were really impacted by his presidency. And as you get older and learn about things like the Bay of Pigs and flexible response, you start to learn a little more. But I think that one thing that has really, I'm going to echo Jared here, that really struck us as we started to delve into his presidency and write about it for the basically the anniversaries, is how great of a speech giver he was. He was absolutely amazing and just had that ability to inspire, which, when you read his speeches now, because we posted one of his speeches on our basically our website, and I was inspired. Like, I wanted to join Special Forces after listening to that, and just thought it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and that speech is 60 years old.
Exactly.
At this point. I want to talk for a second about the role of the historian, though. We're going to talk about JFK. We're going to unpack it, but you have a very unique opportunity and a really important job here at Army Special Operations Command, and you have to capture for posterity what this organization does across all the different components. And not only do you have to capture what the force is doing today, and think about what we're doing tomorrow to figure out how we're going to still keep it part of our lineage and our history. But a lot of what you do, and we joke about the room outside here being the Indiana Jones room. You've got to go back though and really unpack and understand where we've come from. But maybe you could explain for a second, what is the role of the USASOC historian and why is it so critical to the organization when we talk about the importance of JFK?
Yeah, so I think you hit on it. And your question is, one of the most important thing we can do is preserve the history of our organization. which is a challenging thing to do at here at USASOC because special operations is inherently a people-focused organization, and we deploy as individuals, as very small teams, which can make it very challenging for the historian to capture all that. So we are never at a loss for things to research, for things to discover. So our job is one of continuous discovery and trying to make sure that the proud history and legacy of Army Special Operations is captured and is basically made available to the widest possible audiences. That can be challenging, but that's what we do day in and day out. We're always telling stories that may not be well known. We're adding a little bit finer detail to the stories that are well known. And then every day, soldiers are making history around the world. So that's what we're here to do. Make sure it's captured.
Well, and last year we had the chance to, with Troy, to go to Normandy and spend a day. We captured you for a day and went out to Omaha Beach, and you walked us through really the whole invasion of June 6, 1944, and walked the beach, climbed up through the hills, broke the broke the bush through all the brush to get up to the top of the bluffs there and overlook it. And really, you got to become subject matter experts on so many different topics.
So on any given day, I can be working on anything that comes from 1774 to yesterday. And like Jared said, the collection mission is paramount because if you don't collect it, preserve it, it's gone. But at the same time, what we find in this office is inadvertently, we've all found that we're fighting mythology a lot of times. So we're fighting the books that say the secret untold story of, because a lot of times that's factually incorrect. And what we also try to do is uncover a lot of those stories that have not been told before. And so trying to sometimes find some of those angles really involves a lot of depth of research. And that's on the archival level, that's going to families, finding information. And so we're constantly in a collection mode, whether it's from yesterday or if someone approaches us and says, "Hey, my granddad had this stuff. Are you interested?" We had one case that always stands out when we were working on the Korean War. We just had people come out to us and say, "Hey, I have this, I have this." And one gentleman came up to us and said, "Hey, I have every leaflet and translation that my unit produced in the Korean War. My kids aren't interested. Are you?" Yes. Yeah, very much so we are. So fortunately, that happens fairly often, and we're able to preserve these collections that other people like us that have been passionate about something are able to pass that passion on to someone else who will preserve it for them.
And sometimes that does connect us with sort of what we would consider the icons within the community, such as, Major General John Singlob, Colonel Roger Donlin. One of my earliest efforts here was getting the collection for Major General Robert McClure, who's the namesake of the USASOC headquarters building, interacting with his family, getting to know them. Sometimes they just knew him as dad, and then we know him as what an amazing legacy he had for the Army Special Operations community. And so just building that relationship and having his collection kind of be preserved and for posterity and for research here, that's really rewarding. But it's also for all the soldiers that are making contributions. It's not just the big names. It's the teams that we're interviewing and collecting from. And so again, it's just a journey of discovery almost every day.
Well, and you referenced that one of the things that makes your job so difficult at times is the fact that as special operations, we operate in this unconventional warfare fight in all regions of the globe, in all levels of intensity. The one of, if not the biggest proponent of the unconventional warfare fight was John F. Kennedy. And if we go back to his June 6, 1962 speech to West Point, he says this is another type of warfare, new in its intensity, ancient in its origins. War by guerrillas, subversives, insurgents, assassins, war by ambush instead of by combat. And he goes on and talks about the importance of unconventional warfare. And when we look at how America was going to position themselves to best compete against the communist threat, he saw this as the primary effort. He visited in 1961, October 12th, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He went out to Camp McCall and he met with, at that time, General Yarborough, who was the commander of the Special Warfare Center.
Yeah, McKellar's Lodge.
McKellar's Lodge. And he was, and they have this iconic exchange and this capabilities demonstration. Why, in 1961, did John F. Kennedy see this unconventional warfare fight as the future of conflict for America?
That's a really great question. I think it's part of his larger vision of America's role in the world. In 1960-61, he's moving forward with this idea of moving America forward. If you're coming out of the Eisenhower administration, you're seeing 8 years of, okay, we don't have World War III, but there's several events that occur in the 50s. You had the French defeat in Indochina. You had the Suez Canal crisis and Hungarian Revolution. You had the Taiwan Strait crises. You had the shooting down of the U-2. You had Soviets launching Sputnik. I mean, you've got a lot of things happening. You've got the Cuban Revolution, and the United States has sort of backed itself into a corner as far as how it's able to respond to these different events, and that is basically the doctrine of massive retaliation during the Eisenhower administration. Yes, the nuclear deterrent was important, and Kennedy viewed it as important as well, but it kind of limits your options as far as what you can do. And so Kennedy, when he becomes president, he's kind of having this idea is we need to be able to be more involved. In his inaugural speech, he says we have to pay any price and bear any burden for the survival and the success of liberty. So whatever that's economic, whether that's development, whether that's military systems, and so on, we have to be flexible enough to be able to do something. And he viewed Army Special Forces as the natural fit, as the Army's unconventional warfare experts, to be able to fill that role and to be able to, and not necessarily always just respond to crises, but help to work to prevent these crises in advance. And so he's coming into it with that mindset of having this capability, this tool to be able to advance the cause of freedom, to be able to work in these different areas of the world in ways that we might not have considered before.
The Jedburgh podcast is brought to you by University of Health and Performance. Well, and that's that theory of what is the role of special forces. If we do our jobs effectively, you never get to World War III. You never get to nation state on nation state. We talk now about the peer-to-peer threat, the near-peer threat, the China, Russia, major countries that have capability that matches or may even possibly exceed ours. And so we rely now, which, in the environment in the 60s was very much like that, when you had, the theories of détente and, mutually assured destruction. And so what has to be leveraged in these scenarios is we need a force that prevents us from ever getting there through proxy warfare, insurgent warfare on both sides. And that becomes critical. What did Kennedy see when he came here in 1961 and sat down with Yarborough that put it in his mind that said, yes, I'm going full in on this capability?
Yeah, so Kennedy by this time, in the months leading up to that, he's already by this time gone to Congress and talked about increasing Army personnel strength to account for building up the Army's guerrilla warfare capability. He's already formally established the Military Advisory Assistance Advisory Group in Laos, and which had been a special forces mission there going back to 1959. He's very conscious about making a deliberate he's very deliberate in wanting to make special forces a part of his program. So when he's coming here, he's already got in his mind that special forces is going to be what you call the antidote for these communist-inspired wars of national liberation. Um, it's not just when he does come here in October of '61. It's the special warfare demonstrations is a key part of the visit. He's also getting the conventional side as well. He's given the normal celebration and customs and courtesies from the 82nd Airborne Division, 101st Airborne Division, and then he goes to McKellar's Pond for the full suite of special warfare demonstrations. And I could talk a little bit more about special warfare if you have any questions about that. But he's already got in his mind that this is the way to go. And so I think when he comes here, it's less of a discovery mission for him and more of a validation effort on his part. So when he meets these are both when he meets General Yarborough, these are both World War II veterans. They've known each other for quite a long time. They both kind of see the same things, the same potential in special forces. So it's one of, I think, confirmation, one of validation for what special warfare in general and special forces in particular can do on behalf of the nation.
We've talked. Oh, good.
I was going to say, and keep in mind, yeah, if you're the president and you look at special warfare, it's basically a low cost, low risk option where you can employ it, and it's not going to lead to necessarily a irreversible, basically a world situation. And so it's a great tool for him to have in his pocket.
Well, because remember, we're only looking, 15 years at that point past the end of World War II. So the thought in everybody's mind is, we're still recovering from the massive investment and in terms of not only
the
people,
memory is still there.
yeah, it's there. But in terms of the people that were lost, the resources that were devoted. I mean, industry, as you and I had talked about last year, the D-Day series, industry had shifted to supporting the war effort. And so, if you look at economic cycles, you're still trying to come out of the fact that for years we didn't produce vehicles, we produced tanks and airplanes. And so so that thought, as you mentioned, of, can we get into another protracted conflict that's going to require, some world war investment again? Do we even have the capability to do that as a nation? And do we have the willingness and the desire to do that?
But since you mentioned that, kind of the irony of special forces, when you look at the photos of them being employed in this period, what are they carrying? It's all World War II equipment.
Yeah,
because that's what's left over.
Also fresh in the mind too is Korea. And one of Eisenhower's one of his sort of beliefs is that we're not going to do any more Koreas. I mean, can we do this as a nation every time there's a need to contain the spread of communism? Is this going to be a massive conventional deployment every single time? That ends the armistice in July of '53, so that's still very much fresh in the mind as well. So then what you do is you fall back on the nuclear deterrent, and you just kind of hope that you don't have to use it. Kennedy he sees that it's time to go, basically good to go on the freedom offensive, and to be able to get America moving again, and special forces is a way that he can do that.
We obviously spend a lot of time on this show talking about current capabilities and what the definition of special warfare is today, and what special operations do across all the different units, whether that be our Green Berets, our Army Rangers, 160th PSYOPs, CA capabilities within the formation. What was the special operations and special warfare capability of USASOC in 1961?
Don't get him started on definitions.
Yeah, I can take special for
Go ahead.
So, interestingly, prior to this actually came up a few years ago, during the RSOF 2022 discussions. The history of the term special warfare. So just to go back just a little bit, 1952, the Psychological Warfare Center in school is established. And 1956, it's redesignated as the U.S. Army Special Warfare Center in school. The question that was posed to us was why? We're like, okay, that's easy, right? We'll just look back in doctrine. We'll look back at some of the studies that were coming out. That's easy. It was not easy at all. We could not find the reason at all. I have my own theory, and I can't. There's no way I can prove it. The point is during the Kennedy administration, it's my belief that the term special warfare was not very well defined at all. And in fact, it was during his administration that the Secretary of the Army, Elvis Starr, actually directed the Army to produce this study on U.S. Army Special Warfare in roughly 1962, which defined what they did is they researched the topic, and they defined it based on what the Special Warfare Center was teaching. And they defined it at the time as basically a three-pillar concept: counterinsurgency, unconventional warfare, and psychological warfare. And that's how they defined special warfare at the time. Special forces obviously being the unconventional warfare and the counterinsurgency part of that equation. So that's how it was defined at that time. Of course, over time, meanings evolved, but that's what it meant then.
So it was almost a bottom-up definition.
Yeah.
But capability, what you're talking about is a couple special forces groups and psychological operations, because it's not as evolved as we would term the definition today. So no civil affairs, your Ranger units are gone. No special operations aviation, no special operations support.
Yeah, and civil affairs, the closest thing you would have to it at that time would have been what they called civic action, which was part of the counterinsurgency component. Yeah.
President Kennedy was assassinated a couple of years later, really in the lead up in the early stages of Vietnam. The legacy, of our special forces units, obviously predates that time. And, we've spent a considerable amount of time talking about the Jedburgh teams and the OSS teams and the OGs that Troy is probably the foremost worldwide expert, which we're still going to do a piece on.
No problem.
It's on my list.
The OGs.
So, but you mentioned MAGVSOC and their ability to operate in Vietnam. Can you talk for a second about how post the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the support remained for the organization, and how was he instrumental in really solidifying the funding, the resources, the authorizations, that would allow the regiment and the organization to scale and grow? Because as you said, there's a couple of special forces teams, out there, it's pretty loose. But as you go into the Vietnam conflict, you start to really see the ramp up of special operations and special forces and the solidification of the ENTO, right?
Yeah.
And the ranks that have by and large stayed pretty intact, as they are today.
Yeah. So when Kennedy becomes president, there are three active duty special forces groups. There's the 10th, the 7th, and the 1st.
Yeah, the original is the best group.
Yeah. And
now the YouTube comments are coming.
Yeah. And then under his administration, three more are activated: the 8th, the 6th, and the 5th.
Yeah.
Not to mention a whole bunch of National Guard and Reserve special forces groups. So you have a massive organizational expansion that's driven a lot by the need to provide support to our partners and allies around the world. One of the other things that comes out, kind of one of his legacies that comes out of his administration that endures beyond through the 60s was what they call the SAF concept, the Security Action Force, Special Action Force. And that whole concept, it was rooted in the idea of special warfare, where you would have special forces groups that were regionally aligned, and you would have what today we would call, I guess, enabler units attached to it. So you'd have engineer, medical, civil affairs, psychological warfare, and others as needed.
Military police,
and intelligence too. And so you would have the 8th Special Action Force down in Panama. You'd have the 1st Special Action Force in Okinawa, SAF. They would call that SAF Asia. And so you really see this regional orientation start to kind of come about during that time frame. Also, you start to see the operational employment or the concept for the operational employment as special warfare taken all together. So, you'd have special forces, PSYWAR, and civil affairs (MTTs) throughout the Far East. And now some of this is going to not survive the Vietnam era drawdowns, but the concept is there. And I think that's one of the most enduring legacies that comes out of some of the things that were came about during his administration.
Yeah, and what I was gonna say is that, as the real impetus between, for why we're here, and, what we have found in our research is really it goes back earlier, and that's Korea. Because after World War II, essentially everything is disbanded. You have a couple PSYOP units that are still in the inventory and a very small military government and now civil affairs capability. But the Korean War is the one that shows the need for essentially someone to work with indigenous partners, for PSYOP, for a civil affairs capability. And that's kind of the reason. It's no secret of why the PSYWAR Center is created in 1952, because the Army suddenly realizes, hey, we need to keep this stuff in the inventory, and it stays in the inventory after the Korean War. So I just mentioned that because I don't want to leave that part behind, because without the Korean War, you don't have the ability to do special operations in Vietnam.
I think we got to do some more discussion about the Korean War. I think we tend to forget, not forget, but it tends to become overshadowed.
So
by
we in the office, we were going to do one issue of the Old Veritas on the Korean War, and so many veterans came out of the woodwork, and we learned about so many units that we each spent 3.5 years and 7 issues on the Korean War. So we're your guys.
All right. You're the guys for anything within this organization, but yeah, I think it's worth it to start thinking about how do we do, really get that message out and really talk.
75th anniversary in June 25th.
75th, yeah.
Today, the Special Warfare Center is called the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. Every special operator, Army special operator who comes through the schoolhouse is impacted by John F. Kennedy. Within Bank Hall, sits the bust of John F. Kennedy. It's on every building. We are kind of indoctrinated from the beginning when you come to assessment and selection, and then you go to the Q course. You're constantly reminded of his impact. And then you have the iconic Kennedy and Yarborough meeting statue, outside of the headquarters there. Can you talk for a second about why? What does it mean to have his name on the schoolhouse today?
So I think this goes back to, unfortunately, the tragic day that he was assassinated, when you had that association, that close tie between the president and special forces really cemented. Special forces was there from the very beginning of the funeral proceedings. There was not a time once they arrived in Washington, D.C., that his casket was not accompanied by special forces personnel.
Asked for by the family.
They were with him around the clock. They were there at Arlington. They lined the walkway. And then the Special Warfare Center Sergeant Major Francis Ruddy famously laid his Green Beret at the grave of President Kennedy, and said, because you gave us the Green Beret, it's only fitting that we give it back to you. I really think that really cemented the association with him. It wasn't a year later that they dedicated less than a year, that they dedicated Special Warfare Center to President Kennedy, and then a following year after that, in 1965, actually we're coming up on the 60th anniversary of that this month, the dedication of Kennedy Hall over there at Special Warfare Center. Yeah, I think the answer was in your question. I think it's just part of the identity of Special Forces that everybody has just come to embody, and just within the regiment, that close tie that was cemented during his administration, and unfortunately in his death. And I also think there's that message that Troy mentioned earlier of one of inspiration and one of the need to do what we can as a nation to ensure the survival and the success of liberty. And who do we need? Who do we use for that? Who do we turn to before things get out of hand? Is special forces. So I think the it's just a natural tie between them.
And every year, our Green Berets go to his grave and the memorial there in Arlington and lay the wreath. And that wreath laying ceremony has been a really important part. You know, it's an honor within the regiment to be asked to go participate in that ceremony.
It just reinforces the ties that are there.
Yeah. Well, late last year, your office identified that his legacy, that President Kennedy's legacy, was missing one critical component of the ties within our formation. Can you talk about what did you identify was missing, and how did we rectify it?
Well, I can talk about how we identified it, and then I'll put it over to him for what happened with that. But as I was researching the 60th anniversary of Special Forces support to John F. Kennedy's funeral, the question was asked, did he ever receive, an honorary Special Forces tab, honorary Green Beret? And I was like, I don't know. I just kind of assumed so. And so I went to Troy and I was like, what do you think? This has been done, right? And and we pretty much discovered that no, it had not been done. And so from that point, I'll turn it over to him as to what happened.
So I got to hand it to Jared, because he came to me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing an article about the funeral. Yeah, I think I can do it." I'm like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And of course, he stuck his nose down as he typically does, and out pops this article. And so I have to give credit to our PAO office, because when we put it up for review, they said, "Hey, was he ever made an honorary Green Beret?" And what you find sometimes in the community is that everyone assumed it was done. And so when we did the research and looked at it, realized that it hadn't been done. And so at the beginning, it's like with everything, there's always a backstory. And so at the beginning of 2024, we sent basically a letter up and suggested that he be made basically an honorary member of the regiment. And thankfully, and I'll give him credit as well, Major General Slider, who is the commanding general of SWCC, took this on. And he basically gave us the decision of, tell me what's the correct path in order to do this. And so we put him up, President Kennedy, up for the distinguished member of the regiment. And it was actually a little against, I won't say regulations, because it's not really regulation, but a little against policy, because he's very unusual in that typically a distinguished member of the regiment has to serve in the regiment. They have to be a Special Forces tabbed soldier or have served in Special Forces. Kennedy had not. Well, the argument that we had was, well, he was the overall commander-in-chief. So I think that maybe could trump some of these things. And everyone agreed with our thoughts on that. And it was put up in front of a panel at SWCC after we put together a packet basically describing President Kennedy's background, what his influence on Special Forces was, and why he should be a distinguished member of the regiment. It was put up in front of a panel to vote. That was a unanimous panel from what I understand, and that led to his induction.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how long was that conversation?
I don't think it was a long conversation, but it was one of those conversations of, hey, I thought this had already been done. Well, no. Yeah, so let's make it official.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that induction do? What does it do for what does the induction into as a distinguished member of the regiment do for President Kennedy's legacy for the organization, and then also in the eyes of all those who've served?
Yeah, I think it just serves as a reminder, especially for soldiers that are in the regiment today. It's never a bad idea to, and I'll call it read blue, people in their history. And so, certain generations may have grown up with, just this idea of President Kennedy and what he meant for the regiment. But that can be lost in time as generations come up. And so it just brings it back in front of the current generation that you are here and you are wearing the Green Beret because of this person that you just inducted into the regiment.
Yeah.
And I think that, kind of going back to our earlier questions, I think it formalizes what was already kind of assumed anyway. That tie, that connection, that bond that's been there for decades. I think a lot of people had the same reaction that I did, which was, yeah, this is done. Well, this is just a kind of a matter of the process and the paperwork catching up. But I think it formalized that bond that had been there for quite some time now.
It just took 60 years for the paperwork to catch up.
Sure. I always think about Kennedy in terms of and there's a book about Kennedy, and it's called An Unfinished Life. And, it's interesting because when you laid out, Jared, very eloquently, all the things that were going on in the early 60s and the direction that so many of those, the impact that so many of the result of all of those events had on, national security within the United States, the direction of, when we talk about the elements of national power, diplomatic, information, military, economic levers that America pulls, all were affected by all these various events internationally that were happening in the post-World War II era, and the era of really solidification of world power. Who was going to really fill the gap, after the Germans were defeated, and, America crossed the ocean to ensure that was going to happen, and there's all these competing interests. But when we think about President Kennedy and having lost him in the way that we did, I always think to myself, what would history be like if he hadn't been killed? And if he had fulfilled, the first term, so maybe a second term, and what would that have done to the American presidency? I mean, when I was in undergrad, I studied the American presidency. It was my minor, because I find that just whole world to be fascinating. And I always think about that in the back of my mind. And the last question I have for you is, where do you think the organization of special forces sits without President Kennedy?
So I'll answer that first, then I'll let Jared answer it. But my big money maker, if I could do it in the historical field, not to make fun, but I would make T-shirts that say "What if" with a big circle with an arrow with a cross through it, because that's one of the things about being a historian is I can't do counterfactual history, because the what ifs it'll drive you mad if you go down those roads.
Yeah, I think, and that we have the advantage of sticking to what did happen versus what would have happened. But the topic primarily of what would have happened in Vietnam, for example, is a popular one. Had he lived to 64 and been reelected and served through 68, what would things have happened? To me, the evidence showed that the U.S. was, we were escalating, exponentially the amount of special forces advisors during his administration. I think he started off with less than 1,000 there, and by the end of his presidency, there was coming up close to 20,000 in the country. So it was a trend of increase. What's going to happen after that? It's hard to say. Would it have involved into the massive conventional buildup that occurred in 65 timeframe? And it's hard to say. And then, the fate of special forces, of course, is tied to the outcome of the war when you have this desire to draw down and so on. So it's a very, very, there's too many, I think, variables to tell for sure. But I think what is important is that during his lifetime, during his administration, the steps that he took definitively helped secure special forces' place in the Army from that point forward. That we can say.
Well, I love sitting down with you guys because it doesn't matter how good my notes are and how much work we put into the preparation for these things, but I learned 10x more than I could have ever known. And I appreciate you taking the time to really share this story and share the legacy of John F. Kennedy, the importance of him into the regiment, and then also really going through the effort to ensure that he was inducted into the as a distinguished member of the regiment. I know that was a big lift for you guys and the whole team here. And I look forward to what else we're going to cover. So we're talking about doing some pieces on Vietnam here later this year. We got to put the Korea one on there, and we got to talk about the OGs. And so I look forward to sitting down with you again and really continue to dig into the legacy, because as a Green Beret, we live the lineage every day, whether you're wearing the uniform or not. And I've really become hard over the last couple of years of saying that, look, once you're a Green Beret, you're always a Green Beret, because you weren't recruited to wear a hat or a tab. You were recruited for your character and who you are, and that doesn't change whether you're in service or not. And I appreciate everything that you guys are doing, and continue to be one of your biggest supporters. So thank you so much.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for having us on here. But I do want to say, from my standpoint, I don't want to speak for Jared, but I think it's the same. Is that, yeah, it's really a privilege to work in this office and be the preserver and carrier of the torch of history for special operations. I tell people all the time, I have the best job in the world. It's fascinating, and love doing it, and just happy to be here.
Likewise, I agree with everything you said, and I appreciate what you all do to make sure that the proud history and legacy of Army Special Forces and Special Operations gets out there to as many people as possible. We can't do it alone. So in true soft fashion, we rely on partnerships and relationships, and we thank you for what you're doing as well. So it's a privilege.
Thank you. We'll be back soon.
All right.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Rachopi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.